The cop stepped onto my lawn, looked me dead in the eyes, and asked, "Did you install this pool without HOA approval?" I was barefoot, holding a popsicle, and for a second I honestly thought he was kidding, until I saw Gerald Whitmore standing behind him, grinning like he just caught El Chapo. I didn't grow up dreaming about owning a house in the suburbs, not me. I was one of those guys who thought I'd end up in a cabin out in the woods somewhere, with a dog, a tool belt, and a grill that worked better than half the restaurants in town. But then life happened. I met Riley. She was smarter than me, prettier than I deserved, and had this way of talking about the future like it was already real. Marriage, kids, community, all that. Before I knew it, we were signing mortgage papers on a tidy 2-story colonial with white siding and a backyard big enough for a dog, a treehouse, and someday, if I could convince her, a pool. The neighborhood was called Brookridge Estates. Sounded fancy, but it was mostly just normal folks trying to keep their lawns alive and their kids out of trouble. At first, I liked it. Neighbors waved. Kids played kickball in the cul-de-sac. It had that movie suburb feel to it. Cookie-cutter houses, sure, but enough space between them to breathe. Riley loved it, said it was the kind of place Sadie and Jack could grow up safe and happy. And that backyard, man, I fell in love with it the second we saw the place. It had this slope to it, gentle, almost like the land was asking for something to be built there. For a few years, it was just grass and weeds and the occasional slip and slide. But I always knew what I wanted there. The pool idea came up for real when COVID hit and everything went sideways. Riley was working from home, juggling Zoom calls and fevers from the school nurse hotline. My business, I wire up smart home systems and solar arrays, slowed down to a crawl. Clients canceled jobs, supply chains froze up, and I had more free time than I'd had in years. We couldn't go anywhere. Summer camps were shut down, vacations canceled, city pools chained shut. The kids were going stir-crazy, Riley was burnt out, and I was pacing the house like a dog locked inside too long. So one day, I just said it. What if I build us a pool? She looked at me like I'd suggested drilling for oil in the living room, but then she saw I wasn't joking. And to her credit, after like 2 days of grumbling about permits and expenses, she said, "Okay, but we're not going into debt for it, Cal, and it better not look like a meth lab exploded back there." Fair enough. I started doing the research. In-ground was out of the question. Cost was way too high and the time frame was a joke. But I found this killer above-ground vinyl model with a deck kit. Not one of those flimsy blue donut things. This was solid, permanent feeling, with composite wood panels and a frame I could reinforce myself. I had the tools, I had the time, and most importantly, I had a backyard that needed a purpose. Before I broke ground, I remembered the HOA. Barely. We got this welcome packet when we moved in, you know the kind. 15 pages of what color your shutters can be, what flowers you're allowed to plant, and some legalese about trash cans. I remembered skimming it, thinking it all looked like common sense. But I also remembered what the developer had told us when we first bought the house. I asked him straight up, "What if I want to put a shed or a swing set or a pool in the back?" And he said, word for word, "As long as it's tasteful and not an eyesore, you're fine. You own the lot." I didn't record him or anything. Why would I? He said it with that confidence people have when they've said it 100 times before, so I trusted it. Never even thought to get it in writing. Dumb, I know. But back then, I didn't think I'd be fighting a war over it. So I started building. Took me about a month, mostly working evenings and weekends. Jack helped me hold boards in place. Sadie painted little signs for the deck stairs. Pool rules, no peeing. And Riley took pictures of it all like it was a Pinterest project. It felt good. It felt ours. We filled it up late June. Water was cold as hell, but we all jumped in that first night. Just the 4 of us screaming and laughing like lunatics. The air smelled like chlorine and barbecue and bug spray, and for a little while, the whole mess of the world just faded out. It was the happiest I'd seen my family in months. That's the part I want you to remember. Because everything that happened next, the letters, the threats, the lawsuits, all came crashing down on something that started so damn simple. A dad building something for his kids, a family trying to find some joy in a dumpster fire year. And I swear to you, I had no idea what was coming. I didn't know Gerald Whitmore had just been voted in as president of the HOA. Didn't know he had a law degree and a superiority complex. Didn't know he got off on calling people out for violations like he was the sheriff of some beige, vinyl-sided Wild West. I just knew we finally had something in our backyard worth smiling about, and apparently, that was the problem. I think it started with the email. At first glance, it didn't even look like a threat. It was written all polite and official with "Hello, Mr. Becker, and we hope this message finds you well," like it was from a dentist's office or something. But buried right there in the second paragraph was the first hit. It has come to the attention of the Brookridge Estates Homeowners Association that a new above-ground pool has been installed at your residence without prior architectural approval. I remember reading that line 3 times. Architectural approval. What the hell even is that? It sounded like something you'd need for a skyscraper, not a backyard pool with a deck and some solar lights. At first, I laughed. Honest to God, I just laughed. Thought maybe it was one of those mass emails they send out, like, "Hey neighbors, don't forget to trim your hedges and also no meth labs, please." I figured maybe someone got confused. Maybe they meant one of those inflatable kiddie pools that folks leave on their driveway. Then I saw the signature, Gerald Whitmore, President, Brookridge Estates HOA. And I stopped laughing. I didn't know Gerald back then. Never met him. But I'd heard whispers from the older couple across the street, from the guy down the block who always mowed his lawn in jeans and a tucked-in t-shirt like he was going to church. They all said the same thing. Watch out for Gerald. Said he took the HOA thing seriously, like way too seriously. Rumor was he once threatened to fine a neighbor over a mailbox that was off plumb. Whatever the hell that means. Still, I wasn't worried. I figured, okay, a little misunderstanding. I'll clear it up. I fired off a quick reply saying something like, "Amido, hey, appreciate the heads up, but the pool's a family project. I asked the developer years ago, he said we were good to go. If you need anything from me, let me know." Friendly, chill, neighborly, didn't hear back for a few days. No response, no follow-up, nothing. Riley told me to let it go. Probably just a formality, she said, and I agreed. We went on with our summer. Kids were in that pool every day, like clockwork. Even got a little inflatable basketball hoop floating in the corner. I put up a few string lights, added a couple of Adirondack chairs I built myself, and the place started to feel like a damn resort. Then one afternoon, I saw him. Gerald. Khakis, tucked polo, clipboard in hand, walking real slow past our house. He didn't come to the door, didn't wave. Just stood out on the sidewalk, staring into my backyard like he was casing the place for a break-in. I was up on the deck with a drill in my hand, putting the finishing touches on the railing. I saw him out of the corner of my eye and figured, all right, now's the time. Let's talk it out, neighbor to neighbor. I called down, "Hey there, you Gerald." He looked up like I'd caught him doing something shady, smiled, kind of, and said, "Yes, I am." I said, "You're the one who emailed me, right, about the pool?" He nodded, didn't move any closer. I told him, "Yeah, just so you know, I did ask the original developer before we bought the house. He said it was fine. This was way back, before the HOA even had regular meetings or whatever." He kind of tilted his head like a confused owl. Then he said, "Verbal permissions are not recognized under the current architectural standards. All modifications require formal approval through the proper channels." I swear the guy talked like he was narrating a legal documentary. I tried to keep it light. I said, "Well, if there's a form I gotta fill out, just send it over. But it's already built, and the kids are loving it. I'm not trying to stir anything up here." He gave this tight little smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and said, "That's not how the process works. You are required to submit an application and obtain written authorization before any construction began." And that was that. No neighborly chat, no, "Hey, looks good," or "Must have been a lot of work." Just clipped phrases and cold eyes. Then he turned, scribbled something on his clipboard, and walked away. I went inside feeling off, not scared, not yet, just unsettled. Like something small had shifted and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Riley saw my face and asked what happened. I told her. She said, "He sounds like a dick," which was putting it mildly. I shrugged it off again, told myself I was overreacting. But still, I started keeping my eye out. Next few days, I noticed him walking past our place more often, sometimes with someone else, a woman I didn't recognize carrying what looked like a measuring wheel. Once I caught them taking photos from the sidewalk, no wave, no explanation. And yeah, that's when I started to feel it. That twinge, that little itch in the back of your skull when something's not right. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't know what violations he was going to dig up or invent. But I knew damn well that wasn't the end of it. It was just the start. It didn't take long before the next punch landed. One afternoon, I came home from a job, sweaty, tired, still wearing my tool belt, and found a bright yellow envelope taped to our front door. Not slipped into the mailbox, and not handed to Riley. Taped like some kind of eviction notice. Bold black letters across the top. Notice of violation. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA stating that our pool was in direct violation of Section 4B2 of the Community Architectural Guidelines. Guidelines, by the way, that no one in the neighborhood had ever actually seen. The letter said we were being fined $75 effective immediately, and that the fine would continue every single month until the unapproved structure is fully removed. Removed, like we'd just pick it up and toss it in the trash. There was also a corrective deadline. We had until the end of the month to dismantle the pool and restore the yard to its previous approved state. I remember standing in the kitchen with the letter in one hand, a Gatorade in the other, reading it out loud to Riley. She stared at me like I'd told her aliens landed in the backyard. "What does Section 4B2 even mean?" she asked. I said, "Hell if I know. I didn't even know we had a Section 4B2. We spent that night digging through the HOA documents we had, all 30 or 40 pages of vague restrictions and legal babble. Not a single clear mention of pools. Not one. Just this generic line about maintaining architectural harmony within the community, whatever that's supposed to mean. I emailed Gerald, again, told him I'd appreciate a copy of the guidelines they were referencing, along with the documentation showing who approved these rules and when. I was polite, I was direct, I figured maybe this was still salvageable. He didn't respond, not right away. Instead, 2 days later, I got another letter, this time certified mail, same language, same threat, and now with a line added at the bottom. Further noncompliance may result in legal action and recovery of enforcement costs. They were gearing up. That weekend, Gerald showed up again. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought a woman with him, Patricia Miles, I would learn later, the HOA's secretary. They stood across the street with clipboards, measuring tape, a goddamn laser level, and what looked like a binder thick enough to break a window. I was in the garage when I saw them, through the side window. I watched as Gerald paced off my backyard perimeter using slow, deliberate steps like he was surveying land for a government project. Patricia scribbled notes while he pointed toward the fence, the pool, the deck stairs. They didn't knock, didn't say a word, just took their measurements, made their notes, and walked off like two little tyrants who'd just found a new toy to break. At that point, Riley was livid. She started texting the neighbors, trying to find anyone else who'd had trouble with the HOA, or even knew what the hell these standards were. A few folks responded, cautiously. One said he once got a warning for putting up Halloween decorations too early. Another mentioned a dispute over a shed color, but no one had ever heard of actual fines being handed out. Not like this. And definitely not about a pool. I tried calling Gerald's number from the bottom of the letter. It rang twice, then straight to voicemail. Every time. I left messages. No callback. And then, out of nowhere, he did email me back. It was short. One sentence. "This matter is not subject to debate. Continued resistance will be documented accordingly." That's when I knew we weren't dealing with the misunderstanding anymore. We were dealing with a guy who had a hard-on for control and a whole set of rules he apparently made up as he went. The worst part? I couldn't even tell if the rest of the HOA board agreed with him, or if there even was a board. That was part of the crazy. Every time I asked who voted on this stuff, or when the meetings were, or how decisions were made, I got nothing. No transparency, no dates, no signatures. Just Gerald and Patricia acting like they were the law. It started getting in my head. I'd be sitting in the backyard, watching the kids play and catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to pop out from behind the bushes with a tape measure or a summons. I started checking the mail like it might explode. Every piece of paper from the HOA had me tense. Then Riley told me something that hit me hard. Sadie, our daughter, said she didn't want to invite her friends over anymore. She was embarrassed, said, "I think the neighborhood hates us now." That broke me, because this wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about our home, our peace, and slowly, piece by piece, that bastard was taking it from us. Not with bulldozers or wrecking balls, but with letters, fines, and this smug little army of technicalities. And the cherry on top? They offered us a compromise. A formal letter arrived, this one a little more polished, like someone had spent time on it, saying the HOA was willing to allow the pool to remain if we agreed to pay an annual architectural variance fee of $1,200 per year, subject to inspection and renewal. $1,200 a year, to keep something I already built, on my property, with no evidence, no process, no vote. Just a bribe, dressed up in paperwork. I wanted to burn the letter. Riley wanted to frame it, call it what it was, extortion. We argued for days over what to do. She was scared. I don't blame her. Lawsuits, fines, fighting with people who had power. It's not what we signed up for. And honestly, a small part of me wanted to cave. Just pay it. Be done with it. Go back to barbecues and quiet nights. But every time I thought about giving in, I saw Gerald's face in my head. That smug look, like he already knew how it would end. Like I was just another box to check off in his little HOA kingdom. That's when I knew. We were gonna fight. The first lawyer we talked to was a friend of a friend. Handled mostly real estate closings and landlord stuff. Nice guy, but not exactly a warrior. I laid out the whole story for him, top to bottom, handed him the letters, emails, photos, everything. He sat there with this slow frown spreading across his face like someone just told him his dog joined a cult. After I finished, he said, "Well, it's a little murky." I asked him what the hell that meant. He said it wasn't clear-cut. Technically, the HOA can enforce architectural rules if they're in the bylaws and if they followed the right process. But if they didn't form an architectural review board properly, or if they're applying rules inconsistently, we might have a case. Might, he said, like a shrug with a price tag. We hired him anyway because what else were we going to do? Gerald had already started adding late fees to the fines, and the tone of the letters had shifted from stiff to aggressive. Riley got one that called our behavior intentionally non-compliant. We started keeping every piece of correspondence in a big plastic tub under the bed, just in case. The lawyer sent a formal demand letter to the HOA requesting copies of the architectural guidelines, the minutes of any meetings where the pool rules were voted on, and a list of any approved exceptions given to other homeowners. It was worded in that classic lawyer style, dry, precise, with just enough threat behind it to sound serious. Gerald didn't respond. Instead, 2 weeks later, we got hit with a formal notice of legal action. Yeah, they were suing us. For violation of the declaration, for failure to comply with fines, and for refusing to cooperate with negotiated resolution options. I swear, they made it sound like we'd burned down a playground and spit on the mayor. My lawyer called me after he read the complaint. I was in my truck, halfway to a job site, and he opened with, "So they went nuclear." He told me Gerald was demanding we not only remove the pool, but also pay all accumulated fines, plus their legal fees, and a damages assessment for architectural noncompliance, which apparently is a thing. Riley cried when I told her. Sadie locked herself in her room. Jack just asked if the cops were going to take our house away. That night was rough. I mean, really rough. We sat out by the pool, didn't even swim, just sat there. Riley had this far-off look like she was watching a movie she hated but couldn't turn off. I kept trying to tell her we'd figure it out, that the law was on our side, but I didn't even believe it myself. I felt like I'd brought this on us. Like I picked a fight we couldn't win. But the thing is, I had tried to avoid the fight. I went to the next HOA meeting, first one I'd ever been to. Figured maybe if I showed my face, spoke like a human being instead of a file number, I could find some kind of common ground. Big mistake. The meeting was in the community clubhouse. Folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, people pretending to care about shrubs. Gerald sat at the front like he was testifying before Congress. When they opened the floor for concerns, I stood up and started talking. Calmly, clearly, just laying out the facts. I said I wasn't trying to be defiant. I explained what the developer had told us when we bought the house. I asked if the board would consider a variance without the $1,200 ransom. You'd think I'd asked to build a casino. Gerald cut me off mid-sentence. Said the issue was already in enforcement status and that further discussion would only invite confusion. Then he banged this tiny wooden gavel like he was Judge Judy. People clapped. I left that meeting feeling like I'd stepped into a damn cult. After that, we tried the city. Riley called the zoning department to see if they had any oversight over HOA disputes. They said, nope, private community, private governance. Same story with the county. We called a housing advocate group. They sympathized but couldn't do much unless discrimination was involved. I even tried appealing to logic, wrote a long email to the board laying out examples of other violations around the neighborhood. There was a house on the next street with an above-ground shed taller than our pool. A guy with a fence that hadn't been painted since Obama was in office. One neighbor had a satellite dish hanging halfway off their roof like it was about to take flight. You know what the board said? Those properties are not under active review at this time. That's when it hit me. It wasn't about rules. Not really. It was about Gerald. About control. He saw our pool as some kind of challenge to his authority, and he wasn't going to stop until we bent the knee or went broke trying not to. The emotional toll started creeping in hard. Riley stopped sleeping. She'd lie awake reading online forums about HOA abuse and horror stories of people losing their homes over garden gnomes and mailbox paint. I tried to stay calm for the kids, but inside I was a storm. I'd built that pool for them. I'd poured my time, sweat, and money into it, not to piss anyone off, but to give them a place to laugh, to feel normal again after a year of hell. And now it was poisoning everything. Our summer, our home, our peace. I started to feel this slow, gnawing guilt. Like maybe I should have just paid the stupid $1,200 and moved on. Maybe the fight wasn't worth it. Maybe I was dragging my whole family into something I couldn't win. I told Riley that one night. We were standing in the kitchen, lights low, kids asleep upstairs. I looked at her and said, maybe I messed this up. Maybe I should have just shut up and paid the damn fee. She looked at me for a long time, then said, you didn't mess this up. He did. You just refused to be bullied. And then she went back to the living room and sat down with that binder of letters again, highlighting things like a woman building a legal case from scratch. That's when I knew she was in it with me. All the way. But I won't lie. It felt like we were drowning. Like we were standing at the edge of something huge and dark, with no idea how deep it went or how much worse it was going to get. We hadn't even hit bottom yet. It happened on a Tuesday, which for some reason made it feel even more surreal. Nothing dramatic ever happens on a Tuesday. You expect car trouble, maybe a weird email from your boss. You don't expect the thread to finally start unraveling. I was fixing a flickering motion light for an older neighbor a few houses down, a guy named Nate Holloway. I'd talked to him maybe twice before. Retired Army, quiet, the kind of man who still edges his lawn with military precision. He had this old toolbox that looked like it had been through 2 wars, and he insisted on holding the ladder for me even though I told him I was good. After I finished, we sat on his porch for a bit. He offered me a beer, and I figured, hell, why not? I was burned out from another round of HOA letters and needed 10 minutes of not thinking about any of it. We talked about the kids, work, gas prices. I didn't even bring up the pool. I was tired of the story, tired of explaining myself, but as I stood up to leave, Nate said, real casual, so, Gerald still got it out for you, huh? I froze. I said, yeah? That obvious? He let out this dry little laugh and said, I was on the board, you know. Before him. Before everything turned into whatever the hell this is. I turned back and sat down again. That's when it started coming out. Nate told me he'd stepped down from the HOA board the year Gerald became president. Said the man showed up with a binder, a smug smile, and a 5-year restoration plan, like he was running for mayor. Swore he was going to bring the neighborhood back to standards. Nate said Gerald pushed out the old president in one of the shadiest elections he'd ever seen. Private emails, last-minute proxies, no real vote count. But then he said something that stopped me cold. He said, that architectural review board, the one Gerald keeps citing? I nodded. Yeah, it doesn't exist. I thought I misheard him. He said it again, slower. There is no ARB. We never formally created one. We talked about it, sure, back in the day, but we never voted, never filed it with the HOA's legal paperwork. Gerald just started acting like the board existed. And then when people like me started pushing back, he shut down the meetings and reworked the bylaws language to make it sound like he could act as the ORB. I just stared at him. My pulse actually picked up. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than dread. I asked him if he had proof. Nate stood up, went inside, and came back out with a beat-up manila folder held together with a binder clip and hope. Inside were printouts of old emails, back when they used a shared board account, and meeting notes from before Gerald took over. It was all there. Discussions about creating the ARB at a future date, arguments over who should be on it, Gerald pushing back, saying it was unnecessary bureaucracy and he'd handle it himself. One email, dated 2 years before any of this pool mess started, had Gerald writing, if we make the board optional, we don't have to deal with approvals. We can enforce directly through executive review. I asked Nate if anyone else had this stuff. He said probably not. He kept it because, in his words, I knew someday that smug bastard was going to push someone too far. I took the folder home and didn't say a word to Riley until the kids were asleep. We sat at the dining table and I laid it all out. She read through every page with her mouth slightly open, shaking her head. He knew, she whispered. He knew he didn't have the authority. And the wildest part? That whole time Gerald was threatening us with bylaws, fines, and this mysterious architectural review board. He was acting completely alone. No votes, no official structure, just him, some bluffed language, and people too intimidated or too tired to question it. I sent it all to our lawyer that night. Scanned every page, every email. He called me back the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. Cal, he said, this changes everything. It wasn't just the lack of an IRB, it was that Gerald had presented false authority to enforce fines and make architectural decisions without a legal board behind him. That meant every fine, every threat, every letter he'd sent us, all of it, was on shaky ground. Worse, if he used that false structure to collect money from other homeowners, it could be fraud. And here's the kicker. According to our lawyer, the HOA was required by state law to follow the rules in their own declaration, which explicitly said an ORB must be duly established and maintained. Gerald couldn't just skip that part because it was inconvenient. It was the first time since this whole thing started that I felt like I could breathe. For weeks, it had been like trying to fight a ghost, something untouchable and unaccountable. But this was solid, tangible. The house of cards Gerald built just shook, and I was finally starting to see the cracks. But I wasn't going to just throw it at him. No, now I had something better than defense. I had leverage. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't the usual tossing and turning either, not the kind where your mind spins in circles and ends up back at the same dead ends. This time was different. My brain was alive, that kind of sharp, electric alertness you get when you know something just shifted in your favor, but you're still not sure what to do with it. I sat in the garage for a couple hours, just me and a notebook. Riley came out once around midnight with a mug of tea and a tired smile, kissed the top of my head, and left me to it. She didn't say a word. She knew what I was doing. Hell, I think she wanted me to do it, because now we weren't just some family being bullied by an overzealous HOA president. Now we had proof. We had Gerald's own words, in writing, showing that this whole campaign against our pool was built on fake authority, a board that didn't exist, rules he made up, enforcement he pulled out of thin air. But having the ammo and using it? Those were two different things. I didn't want to just throw it in a courtroom and hope for the best. I wanted a plan, a real one, something that would hit back on our terms. So I made a list, not one of those buy milk, clean gutters lists. This was different. More like a hit list, if I'm being honest. Names, dates, loopholes, pieces of leverage. First was the email chain Nate gave me. That was gold. The dates alone were damning, proving the IRB was never formally created. And not just that, they also showed intent. Gerald knew what he was doing. He skipped the process on purpose. You don't call something unnecessary bureaucracy in writing and then pretend you're following protocol. He'd buried himself in his own words. Next was the HOA's own declaration, the official founding document of the neighborhood, registered with the county. Our lawyer combed through it line by line and highlighted the exact section that required the creation and maintenance of an architectural review board before any architectural enforcement could be valid. Guess what? No board, no enforcement. No enforcement, no fines. That alone could nuke everything Gerald had sent us. But it still felt like one side of the story. We needed more fuel, more voices. So we started digging. Riley reached out to every neighbor we knew, even ones we barely talked to. She went door to door with a printout of the certified mail we'd received from the HOA and asked if anyone had ever been fined. Not warned, fined. Most of them said no. Some were shocked that we had been. One guy, older gentleman named Roy, who lived at the bend of the street, said Gerald gave him a verbal pass a year ago when he built a pergola without paperwork. Verbal pass, he said, laughing like it was nothing. Riley just smiled and asked if he'd be willing to say that on paper. He paused, then he nodded. We started collecting those stories. Quietly, carefully. If we came at it like we were rallying a rebellion, it'd spook people. So instead, we framed it like research. Like, hey, has this ever happened to you? Most folks were more than happy to talk. Turns out Gerald had a long history of picking and choosing who had to follow the rules. One neighbor painted their garage door bright red. No fine. Another had a satellite dish attached to the front of the house. Just got a warning. Meanwhile, we were getting sued over a pool nobody could see from the street. Every bit of this went into a folder I'd labeled Selective Enforcement. Meanwhile, our lawyer was working on his side. He started drafting a countersuit, not just as a defense, but as an offense. The idea was to hit Gerald and the HOA with claims of exceeding authority, violating fiduciary duties, and enforcing non-existent policies for personal control. But here's the real kicker, and I almost missed it. Nate, my new best friend, mentioned something in passing while we were flipping through old HOA newsletters. He said, "You know, I don't think they ever recorded the updated bylaws properly. Gerald said he'd handle that when we restructured the board, but I never saw the paperwork get filed." That set off a little alarm in my head. Our lawyer checked, dug into the county records, and sure enough, the revised bylaws Gerald kept referencing, the ones he used to justify his direct authority, had never been officially filed. Legally, that meant they had no teeth, no standing. They weren't worth the paper they were printed on. It was almost too perfect. At that point, we had 3 key weapons. 1, proof the ARB didn't exist. 2, witnesses confirming Gerald applied rules selectively. 3, confirmation that the bylaws backing his authority were never legally recorded. Any one of those things could have been enough to shake up the case. Together, they were a wrecking ball. We didn't rush it. That was the hard part. When you've been kicked and pushed for so long, the urge to strike back fast is real. But this had to be clean, precise, no screw-ups. We waited a few weeks, kept things quiet, Let Gerald think we were still cornered, still overwhelmed. He probably pictured me at home drafting apology letters and measuring how fast I could drain a vinyl pool. Meanwhile, we were preparing to flip the entire damn table. And once the plan was locked in, once the evidence was lined up and the lawyer had the countersuit ready, I wasn't nervous. I was hungry. I wanted him to feel exactly what we'd been feeling for the past 6 months. Only now it was our turn to send him a letter. It started with an envelope. We didn't knock on his door, didn't march into a meeting. We just mailed Gerald the exact kind of thing he loved sending everyone else, only this one had a different kind of sting. Our lawyer served it certified, thick stack of documents, formal countersuit notice attached, claims of improper governance, breach of fiduciary duty, selective enforcement, and an injunction request to halt all fines and enforcement activity until a full review of the HOA's actions could be conducted. And right there, bold and clean on the 3rd page. The Brookridge Estates Homeowners Association has failed to establish and maintain a legally compliant architectural review board as required by its own governing declaration. We waited, didn't hear anything for days. No email, no letter, no late-night clipboard sightings. It was quiet, almost like we'd hit a nerve. And then came the fireworks. First, Gerald sent out a neighborhood-wide email. You know, one of those community updates he loved so much. Except this one was weird, defensive. You could feel the sweat coming through the screen. He didn't mention our names, of course, but he talked about frivolous legal distractions, deliberate misinformation, and homeowners seeking to undermine the integrity of the neighborhood. That was rich. The best part? He accidentally CC'd the wrong list and included people outside the board, which meant half the block saw him spiral in real time. People started talking. Neighbors who hadn't said a word before suddenly had questions. Wait, we have an architectural review board? Who's on it? Didn't he say those bylaws were updated in 2018? Where's the vote record? Has anyone ever seen a meeting agenda? Riley and I didn't have to say a thing. The doubt was blooming all on its own. Still, Gerald wasn't the type to just roll over. 2 days after the letter was served, we got another legal packet, this time from the HOA's private counsel, a full rebuttal, long-winded, aggressively worded, full of legal posturing and empty threats. But here's the funny part. They didn't actually disprove anything we said. They just tried to bury it in fluff. Talked about intent to comply and implied authority structures and historical precedent. Our lawyer ate that thing for breakfast. He sent back a response that was so calm, so cold, and so meticulously documented that I swear I could hear Gerald's forehead veins pulsing from across the street. Then came the real twist. The court granted a preliminary hearing. Our request for an injunction was approved temporarily until the matter could be fully reviewed. That meant no more fines, no more threats, no more letters, and no more HOA action against our property until a judge could take a closer look. We won a pause button, a big one, and that's when everything started to tilt. Gerald tried to play tough, started walking the neighborhood again like nothing was wrong, clipboard in hand, chin held high. But people weren't smiling at him anymore. They were watching, whispering, asking questions. A few neighbors started coming up to me in the driveway, quietly, like they were passing secrets during wartime. One guy, Jeff, 3 doors down, said he'd been fined 2 years ago for painting his trim off-white instead of classic white. Paid it because he didn't want to deal with the hassle. Now he wanted to know if he could get it back. Another couple said they got denied a garden trellis because it was too visible from the street, but saw Gerald's friend 2 blocks over put up something almost identical with no issue. We weren't the only ones who'd been screwed. We were just the only ones who fought back. Meanwhile, Riley had turned into a damn machine. She was building timelines, filing documents, creating a chart of who got warned, who got fined, who got ignored. You'd think she was prepping a racketeering case. Our lawyer said he wished all his clients were like her. But it wasn't all smooth. Right when things started swinging our way, Gerald pulled one last dirty move. He called an emergency HOA board vote, unannounced to the community, to push through a retroactive amendment to the bylaws. Basically, he was trying to legally backdate the creation of the Architectural Review Board and give himself cover for all the actions he'd taken. Classic. But here's the thing about shady moves like that. People notice, especially when they're already watching you closely. One of the board members, a woman named Dana who always kept to herself, reached out to us anonymously, said she felt sick about it. She sent us screenshots of Gerald texting board members before the vote, telling them exactly what to say. One message said, "We need to present a united front or we'll all be liable." That right there, that's the kind of sentence lawyers dream about. We handed it over immediately. From there, it just snowballed. Our lawyer filed an emergency motion accusing the board of improper governance and manipulation of records. The judge, who already wasn't thrilled with Gerald's antics, scheduled a full evidentiary hearing. At that point, Gerald's tone shifted. He started avoiding eye contact, stopped showing up at the pool area, canceled the next HOA meeting due to scheduling conflicts. Patricia Miles, the clipboard shadow, suddenly took a leave of absence. And then, out of nowhere, we got a call. Gerald's attorney wanted to talk settlement. Riley and I sat at the kitchen table while our lawyer laid it out. They wanted to drop the case, wipe the fines, pay a portion of our legal fees. In exchange, they wanted confidentiality, no social media posts, no public statements, no press. I almost laughed. After all that, after 6 months of stress and fines and threats and lawsuits, they wanted to walk away quietly. Riley didn't laugh, though. She just said, "No deal." And I agreed, because this wasn't about the pool anymore. This was about what they did. And they weren't getting to erase it with a check and a non-disclosure. We told them, "We'll see you in court." I'll never forget the look on Gerald Whitmore's face when the judge told him, flat out, in open court, that he had no legal authority to issue any of the fines or enforcement actions he'd taken over the last 2 years. It was like watching a man realize his house is on fire while he's still holding the match. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The hearing was scheduled in the county courthouse, not some big fancy federal thing, just your standard courtroom with buzzing fluorescent lights, chairs that feel like they're designed to punish your spine, and a clerk who looked like she hadn't blinked since Clinton was in office. The room was packed. I didn't expect that. But word had gotten around. Neighbors, people we barely knew. Even that guy who always acted too busy to wave started making small talk in the hallway before it began. A few of them leaned in and whispered things like, "Good for you," or "It's about time someone stood up to that guy." One woman brought a yellow folder full of her own HOA complaints, like she was ready to testify if needed. Gerald showed up in a navy suit like he was heading to a Senate hearing. His lawyer, younger guy, full of swagger, kept whispering in his ear, trying to calm him down. But you could see it, that panic under the surface, that creeping realization that this thing he built, this image of authority and control, was starting to crack. Our lawyer, cool as ice. He walked in with a rolling case, nodded to the clerk, and took his place like it was just another Tuesday. The judge was sharp, older guy, no nonsense. You could tell early on he had zero patience for fluff. He asked simple questions and expected straight answers. Gerald struggled almost immediately. When asked to provide the founding documentation for the Architectural Review Board, he handed over a printed Word doc with no signatures, no dates, and no filing stamps. The judge looked at it, raised one eyebrow, and said, "This is your legal foundation for 2 years of enforcement?" Gerald mumbled something about implied consent through board tradition, and the courtroom actually chuckled. Then our lawyer laid it out. He presented Nate's email thread, the original bylaws, the missing filing with the county, and the revised language that never legally existed. He brought up the screenshots of Gerald coaching board members ahead of that secret vote. He cited the HOA declaration line by line, showing the legal requirement for a properly constituted ARB, and pointed out that not only had it never been created, but Gerald actively blocked its formation in writing. Every point landed like a hammer. When our lawyer walked back to his seat, I swear you could feel the oxygen shift in the room. Then came the ruling. The judge didn't even take it under advisement. He ruled right then and there. The court recognized that the Brookridge Estates HOA, under the direction of President Gerald Whitmore, had overstepped its authority, failed to comply with its own governing documents, and engaged in selective, inconsistent enforcement practices that violated the legal rights of homeowners, namely us. He ordered all fines against us to be dismissed, all legal threats retracted, and Gerald, he was personally censured by the court for misrepresentation of authority. That's not just a slap on the wrist. That's the legal equivalent of someone stamping "not your job" on your forehead in red ink. But that wasn't even the best part. The judge ordered a mandatory reformation of the HOA's governance structure, meaning the HOA had to hold a public vote to form a proper architectural review board, file it legally, and notify every resident. In short, Gerald lost the throne. A week later, the news broke. Local paper ran a headline that said, "HOA president oversteps, loses legal fight against homeowner in backyard pool battle." It got shared around like wildfire. One of the local radio stations picked it up. Then a blog about HOA abuse featured the story with a headline that said, "David beats Goliath," in swim trunks. Riley printed that one and stuck it on the fridge. Neighbors started showing up at our door, not out of pity, out of respect. They brought baked goods, wine, even one guy who handed me a six-pack and said, "For keeping that prick in check." People started organizing. A few residents filed their own formal complaints. The HOA meetings got crowded fast. Gerald tried to attend the next one. Walked in like he still owned the place. But someone stood up and said, "You're not welcome here." The room applauded. 3 weeks later, Gerald Whitmore officially resigned from his position. The letter was short and bitter, said he was stepping away to focus on personal matters and spend more time with family. Classic. Nobody bought it. No one cared. He left in the middle of the night, literally. Packed a U-Haul and was gone by sunrise, just like that. And suddenly the air felt lighter, like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath and finally let it out. But the cherry on top? The HOA had to pay our legal fees. Not all, but a good chunk, enough to cover the worst of it. Enough that Riley and I didn't have to sell the car or dip into college savings. Enough that we could stand there in our backyard, beer in hand, and feel like we hadn't just survived. We'd won. Not just for us, but for every neighbor who got fined for the wrong flower box, for every Halloween skeleton that had to come down early, for every porch light that wasn't the right shade of white. We didn't just beat the HOA, we dragged their dirty laundry into the sun and let the whole damn street see it. The pool's still there. Still blue, still cold as hell in the mornings, still a little crooked on the west side where the yard dips, and I love it for that. That dip, that imperfection, that little lean, that's mine. Every screw in the deck, every panel I bolted down, every step I nailed with Jack holding the flashlight upside down, it's all still there. And now it's not just a place to cool off when Georgia turns into an oven. It's something else, something bigger. The first weekend after the ruling, Riley threw this cookout, not a party, not officially. But let's just say the whole neighborhood just happened to wander by. We had burgers going, cornhole in the grass, music low on the speaker. People brought their own lawn chairs, their kids, their stories. A few apologized for not speaking up earlier. I didn't hold it against them. I get it now. Most folks just want to keep their heads down and not make waves. That's how HOA types like Gerald operate. They bank on people being too polite, too busy, too tired to push back. But something's changed now. You can feel it in the way people talk at the mailbox, in the way the new board does actual open meetings with printed agendas and Q&A time at the end, in the way neighbors are asking each other for input before starting projects, instead of waiting for a letter to show up like a bomb in the mailbox. It's like the fear just drained out of the place. The kids use the pool every day in summer. Sadie brings her friends over again. Jack built a little sign out of plywood and Sharpie that says no fines allowed, and nailed it to the gate. I left it up. Riley says we should stain it or paint over it or something, but I kinda like it the way it is. Loud, ugly, defiant, just like this whole mess was. I catch myself walking the yard sometimes, just looking. Not patrolling like Gerald used to, not checking for weeds or violations, just being. I didn't realize how tense I'd been those first few years, always waiting for the next warning, the next petty complaint. Now I just listen, to the splash of water, the quiet hum of cicadas, the sound of my son laughing as he cannonballs and gets everyone wet whether they asked for it or not. Riley still keeps the binder, all the letters, copies of emails, court paperwork. It's up on the closet shelf now, right next to the Christmas decorations. Every once in a while she'll pull it down and flip through, half smiling like she can't believe we lived through all that. Sometimes I can't either. I look back at that version of me, the one who stood on his deck, dripping wet, holding a popsicle, while a cop asked if I had approval to build something on my own damn property. And I laugh now. But back then, I felt small, helpless, like we were just one more family stuck under the thumb of a guy who thought power made him untouchable. But here's what I learned. Even when the rules are stacked, even when the system feels rigged, even when you feel like you're yelling into a void, if you keep showing up, if you dig, if you refuse to let them rewrite reality just because it's convenient for them, you can win. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's possible. So yeah, the pool's still there, and every time I dip my feet in, I remember what it cost us, not in dollars, but in grit, in nights lying awake, in tears, in documents spread across the dining table, in that look Riley gave me when she said, "You didn't mess this up, he did." That pool, that's our monument, and I dare anyone to try and take it from us now.